Welcome to the Big Four Accounting Firms podcast, brought to you by big4accountingfirms.com. Now, in today's podcast, I wanted to talk about more news about the Big Four accounting firms splitting up. The latest news is that Deloitte is considering splitting up. Now, I was very wise, I guess, to wait on reporting on this because apparently Deloitte has already denied that they're looking into this or that they're going to split up. The first report came out of the Wall Street Journal, and apparently these reports are coming out of the investment banks. I guess Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan are leaking. So I guess that's a heads up to anybody that's doing any business with Goldman Sachs, is that anything you're looking into is going to be leaked to the Wall Street Journal. So we've apparently found the weak link, at least in the case of Deloitte. But also, if you remember, EY is talking to these same banks, and apparently somebody's leaking at these banks. But for Deloitte, I believe that they're not going to do it because Deloitte's whole business model is around consulting. Their audit practice is very small, and they've stuck together this whole time. They're the only Big Four accounting firm that kept their consulting branch through Enron/Arthur Andersen controversy. So for them to break up right now doesn't really make sense. And a lot of these reports you're seeing come out are people that aren't educated with regards to the Big Four accounting firms. So they're making a lot of assumptions. And Australia, the one news source that is very good is the Australia Financial Review. However, even they had something that I didn't like the other day, but it was more of an opinion on the three paths that EY had to follow to split up their firm, and they all involved sales. But what the person didn't realize was that EY doesn't have to sell their consulting arm. They can just split it off. And yeah, there might be some remuneration that goes back, but they don't have to necessarily sell it or make it go public. They can just spin it off, because that's one of the biggest problems with the Big Four accounting firms is they don't want the audit and the consulting to be together. They're not, people think they're looking for a payout, and that is a big piece, but they also just want some peace and quiet in their lives, and they don't want to be regulated to death, which is what many of them are afraid of facing, because in the case of Arthur Andersen, they got the death penalty for messing up on Enron, and they all want to avoid the death penalty for their corporation, whereby a regulator completely destroys the company by fining them or not allowing them to do business in a significant country. And this would be both auditing and consulting. So they want to avoid that. And one way they would do it is by just splitting off consulting, not necessarily selling. So the fact that, some of the article, this article wrote about how, why we'll have a hard time finding private equity. It's not a good market to IPO. And last time E&Y spun off their consulting into Capgemini, they said it didn't go too well, which I thought was very interesting to have the background on that. And you really don't hear about E&Y's old consulting practice too. So that's good to know and to learn about. But in the case of Deloitte, they've denied that they're restructuring. PwC denied it too, according to Reuters, and saying that they're committed to their current plan. And I think that makes sense for PwC as well, because PwC just did the new equation, where they're essentially trying to rebrand their firm into two separate companies to show that they are independent, the auditing and the consulting. But another thing to remember in all of this, as people write articles, is that audit, tax, and consulting aren't in silos. Even though the Big Four accounting firms, the way they work is very siloed, but they interact together a lot. So when these companies are splitting up, they're not just thinking about sales price, etc. They have to think about the continuity of their business, because tax supports audit, consulting supports audit a little bit, but tax uses consulting, etc. They're all intertwined. They all collaborate on various projects. They might not be one and the same. They're all different teams in different regions, but breaking that apart and figuring out like who gets taxed between audit and consulting. If you're trying to split them up, like which direction does tax go to? Because it's one article said about how the E&Y and Deloitte have built large outsourcing practices that we've talked about previously in PwC too, about outsourcing tax departments. Like where would that figure in? Would that go with consulting? Which part of tax would go with consulting and which part would go with audit? Would you keep them together? It's very unique to each firm, and PwC has the largest audit and tax practice. So there's a lot of different implications for the different firms. But the latest news about Deloitte splitting up appears to not be true, and I would lean towards agreeing that it's not true. But as I said on that first E&Y splitting up podcast, that the big four accounting firms are similar. So they're all going to explore this. But whether or not they actually go through with it is another thing. And I don't think Deloitte would, but we'll keep an eye on it. So with that, make sure to subscribe to this podcast so you can stay up to date. And also check out the show notes for useful links. Thanks for listening.